Okay, we are back talking college football on the Our Lads Football Network, the OFN Today. It's Big Ten football, Ohio State Buckeye football to be precise. And that means we're talking to Kevin Noon, who is the associate editor of BuckeyeScoop.com. All right, Kevin, you got the new gig.
I sure did. Yeah, I still have a seat at the table. So, let's go.
That's it. And Buckeye Grove, Buckeye Scoop. Grove was where you were. Now it's Buckeye. How long were you with the former Grove
15 years.
15 years. Wow. That's a big change. And now you go to a site that's only been around for a couple of years, so that's got to be real exciting.
Yeah, a lot of things that we're doing over there. I mean, a heavy emphasis on multimedia, live content. So it's really exciting. This allows me to focus more on some of these new emerging technologies. So, I'm really enjoying myself. And anybody who's watching that's a big Ohio State fan, give us a look over at BuckeyeScoop.com.
And what are your podcast? Do you do like a weekly, a daily, or?
I'm still developing it. I've been with Buckeye Scoop for a week now, so still kind of. I haven't found out where the break room is yet. Or
Okay.
I work from home, so but I'm still sorting things out. But yeah, I'll certainly be running 1 or 2 podcasts a week for myself. But I'm also helping develop things for existing staff members, so it's all very exciting.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk Buckeye football, and already a game under their belts, and it wasn't an easy game, and not like it was going to be. I mean, anytime you play, a good conference opponent on the road to start the season, that's going to be tough. And it was tough for Ohio State. They had some key players that they were replacing, including, of course, Justin Fields at quarterback. So what did you think about the performance overall?
It looked like a season 1 type of game where you're replacing a lot of key guys. I certainly have some issues with. I felt Ohio State got a little too cute in trying to roll guys in and out. It felt like they were changing hockey lines at times where they would pull 4 guys out and put 4 guys in. And it just kind of felt like they just were trying to take a look at everybody. And I can understand that to a certain extent. But when you're down at halftime on the road against a conference opponent, I don't know if that's the time that you need to be doing things like that. So, CJ Stroud ended up the night with 4 touchdowns. No team in the Big Ten had more than 3. So, Stroud certainly did well there. Ohio State 10.3 yards per play. A lot of big hits. Only had 1 drive that went longer than 7 plays.
Yeah.
But, with that being said, there certainly were some points where there's a lot of room for improvement. Stroud, certainly, it looked like it took him a minute to control his emotions. Airmailed a couple throws, shorted a couple throws, but, really started to settle down a little bit in the second half. But, I think if you're an Ohio State fan, you're like, are we going down this path again with the defense giving up in the 30s? We saw that in 2020. We tried to chalk that up to it being a COVID year, but we can just go back a couple years prior to 2018 and Ohio State's defense. They come out and they beat Oregon State 77-31, and everybody's like, well, that's just a bit of an anomaly, and it proved not to be. So, they need to nip that in the bud, and they're going to certainly have a challenge here in week 2 with Oregon coming to town.
Yeah, because the team defensively replaced all your key linebackers, Werner, Borland, and Browning, the top DB in Sean Wade. So the strength of the defense is still up front, though, on the line of scrimmage. And sure enough, Zach Harrison, he had 1 of the 2 sacks in the game. Who do you think was the biggest disruptor up front on the defensive line in this game against Minnesota?
Well, and that's the thing is that they just really didn't get the pass rush once again that everybody came to expect under Chase Young or, one of the Bosa brothers or somebody along those lines. And they just rolled guys out that, you just never really got a feel who was getting in there. I mean, they were a half second late on a couple of plays. I mean, you certainly have to focus on Haskell Garrett coming back for another year on the interior part of the line. He certainly is a tremendous player. Zach Harrison, I think, kind of had a mixed bag. I mean, he did have the strip sack that led to the touchdown, but there were some times where it just didn't look like he was getting it looked like Minnesota was getting much more of a push on Ohio State than the other way around. So, I don't have a great read necessarily on who had a fantastic game for the defensive line, because I felt that there was a lot more that could be done there. But in their defense, Minnesota, while Ohio State may have the best offensive line in the Big Ten, Minnesota is probably a close second. I mean, they were all returners. Their one tackle was like 6'9", 370. I mean, they had some dudes. So I'm not saying that there's going to really be any let up necessarily against Oregon, another top Power 5 type of team. But I think as the year goes on, you're going to see Ohio State start to get home once they come in and on paper are already overmatching the line that they're going to be going against.
That's the thing, especially about college football, is that it is just so early in the season. Sometimes you don't know based on matchups, especially because from year to year, things change so much in college football. You just don't know. All right, well, how good is Minnesota? Okay, like you said, well, maybe by the end of the year, we'll go, you see, we told you Minnesota was that good. It happens in Oregon, this big matchup this week. And Oregon, now, were they looking ahead? They got out-yardaged by Fresno State. And Thibodeau gets hurt. So was it a precautionary thing? Well, let's just get him out because we got Ohio State next week. Who knows? They can't afford to not have him in the game. And that's the big matchup that everybody was pointing to. And who knows also, were the players at Ohio State kind of thinking ahead at Oregon? Nobody knows, but the fact is the win's the win. And now comes the big Oregon matchup. And who knows what to take about the game last week for Oregon. At least they're happy they won, unlike Washington, who couldn't beat Montana.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of crazy upsets. I mean, you go to the ACC, Charlotte beats Duke, Northern Illinois beats Georgia Tech. I mean, just saw these types of things all over the board. So you don't know where a team's mindset is. You never want to sit there and say, in my opinion, by the definition of a trap game can never be week one, because if you fall into a trap week one, you probably just weren't very good to begin with. And I'm not sitting there and summarily saying that Washington isn't very good or well, I don't necessarily think much about Duke. I mean, sure. But or Georgia Tech or whatnot. Yeah. So you don't know at that point, but it's very easy to let your mind wander toward that next game when you have kind of that marquee situation coming up. And for Ohio State, I don't know if you're looking past it because you're starting on the road under the lights on a Thursday night. Yeah. But I will say this, I mean, you certainly are out of your routine where, okay, well now my Tuesday is my Sunday or whatever, and we're staying in a hotel for the first time, and while there certainly are still going to be some regulations in place in terms of you're probably not going to have the same amount of movement that you did pre-COVID. I mean, things are opening up more, and you have a lot of young guys who are now going on the road, and they're like, well, now I have to really be dialed in because I'm doing more than just special teams. I'm going to be jumping into this role. So, I think that maybe Ohio State was a little vanilla, but I don't think it's a matter of everybody who gets excited saying, oh, well, they're just holding stuff back. No, it's not that they're holding stuff back. Maybe they haven't installed things. I mean, you install game by game, so you're not dealing with the full reach of the playbook. Sure. But it's not like they're like, well, this play always works. We're just going to save it for next week or whatever. When you're fighting to try and win, because honestly, if you drop a game, it's going to be really difficult to get back into it. So I mean, especially a conference game. So we'll see. We'll see.
All right, I tell you what. Let's before we kind of dive a little bit more into the big matchup this week, I just want to quickly go over this year's 2021 version. So CJ Stroud still has a long way to go, no question about that. But we are still, again, talking about another pocket passer. I still believe Ohio State is a lot more dangerous when they have a quarterback that can add that extra dimension, as far as the running game. But Stroud is a very young kid. How does he compare to some of the other young quarterbacks that you've seen at Ohio State?
Well, when it comes down to, first start for Ohio State, I mean, he's right there numerically. But, again, he was aided by 70-some yard touchdown reception by Trevion Henderson, having a couple of touchdowns from Chris Olave that were long. I mean, all of Ohio State's scoring drives were long drives. So, it was on some of them, it was a 6-yard pass and a 64-yard run. Sure. So, I mean, you're not going to know. But when people say pocket passer for Stroud, let's remember in limited action in 2020, Stroud never threw a pass, but he did have a long touchdown run. Is he Justin Fields in terms of athleticism? No, but who is? I mean, it's Justin Fields. So I think that Stroud, he checks off all of the boxes. Does he have the biggest arm of all the quarterbacks on Ohio State's roster? No, that probably goes to Kyle McCord. Is he the most elusive runner out there? Maybe not, but I think he can still do a lot of things. So once he gets his emotions under check, once things start to slow down, and you don't know. I mean, are things going to slow down game 2, game
Sure.
6, game 10 next year? You don't know. It's a different path for every player out there. But in looking at him versus some of these other young quarterbacks who've come through the system, I think things are comparable. But let's remember when Justin Fields came in, he had a year under his belt at UGA. So, and even though he wasn't necessarily asked to throw the ball a lot, he went through these games. I mean, he wasn't starting, but he was playing. So then you go back and you look at Dwayne Haskins. Well, Dwayne Haskins was inserted at the end of a Michigan game when JT Barrett got hurt, and had some experience before he was the dude for his 1 year. So you have to kind of temper yourself when you just look apples to apples at numbers versus numbers versus numbers. CJ Stroud is coming in as, much more green than everybody else. Yes, CJ Stroud had a year in the program last year, but I would say of all the years that I've been watching the sport, 2020 was probably the worst year to be a developmental guy who was looking to gain experience when you had conferences like the Big Ten. You didn't know if you're playing week to
Sure.
week. You didn't have the build up and everything
Great
else.
point.
So
Yep.
those number 2 reps were probably not great number 2 reps, not based on the athlete, but just based on the system, because you were just trying to cobble together a team to roll out on the field and try and play a game.
Okay, now the running game, was it a surprise that Williams was a little bit more of the number 1 guy production-wise? I didn't look at the total snaps as far as who was actually out there more, but production, it was all Williams. Was that a surprise?
No, I think that people felt that just due to the, tenure on the team situation, that it was going to be Master Teague, that Master Teague was probably going to be the guy. But, we'd certainly heard the whispers coming out of camp that Trevion Henderson and that Mayan Williams were both, poised to have those, potentially have bigger roles. And, we saw that in terms of some of the yardage and whatnot. Master T coming out there with the ones Mayan Williams coming out there with the ones was not a complete surprise. I think his 71-yarder was a bit of a surprise. I mean, he certainly wasn't going to break any track records out there, but again, it just goes to show how good Ohio State's offensive line was. I mean, he was well into the 3rd level before anybody even looked like they were starting to get an angle on him, and he was able to finish off the run. It's Master Teague saw his career take a major hit when he dealt with an Achilles injury. He just hasn't really looked the same since then. And the truth of the matter is that Master Teague is more of just a downhill type of runner. He doesn't have a lot of that shake, a lot of that wiggle. And, maybe he would work better in other systems. But in terms of how Ohio State runs the ball, if he's not able to make that first move, I mean, there are a lot of times where a 4-yard play turns into a 4-yard play, where maybe some of these other guys are able to turn a 4-yard play into an 8-yard
Sure.
play or a 16-yard play. So, I'm not necessarily surprised that Mayan got out there at first. I think what did surprise me is Mayan has his drive early and then doesn't get back out there for like an hour. And I understand Ohio State trying to keep everybody happy, trying to feed everybody. But I think once again it goes to being too cute and not dancing with the who brought you there.
Sure.
I think Ohio State needs to kind of focus on that a little bit more, and I expect to see, probably if the Oregon game is tight, which I think it will be for a while here on Saturday, I expect to see a little bit of a shorter bench.
Okay. And then the receivers, I mean, what can you say? Olave and Garrett Wilson, 2 of the best as far as pair receivers in all of college football.
Yeah, and I guarantee you we'll get to the scouting combine and the pro days and everything else, and we'll hear about how there are 12 other guys who are more athletic than him,
Yeah.
and this, so on and so
Yeah.
forth. Because, Chris Olave isn't, he isn't going to come out there and just, I don't think he's going to come out and just have just this gigantic testing day in Indianapolis at the combine. But you just sit there and you put the tape in and you see what he does. I mean, and it goes all the way back to his freshman year when he had a pair of touchdowns against Michigan. His ball skills are tremendous. He runs terrific routes. And, he does all of the little things. So that 1-2 punch between Olave and Wilson are fantastic. People didn't even get a chance to see the next wave of receivers with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka and Jaden Ballard, because Ohio State only had 6 guys that were targeted in the throw game. But yeah, Olave certainly, in my opinion, is, locked in there as a high first rounder type of guy. I mean, we'll get through the rest of the season, and then you have Garrett Wilson, who will be draft eligible after this year, and I would expect him probably to go pro as well. And, while, you look at them and you see some similarities maybe in body types, I think that there's some differences in terms of what their games are, but, a tremendous 1-2 punch.
Who would be considered then the number one breakout player at wide receiver? Somebody that you may not be a household name today, but could be by the end of the season.
I think the guy that's going to step into that role will be Marvin Harrison Jr., because I think that, the Ohio State's number 3 receiver coming out of the slots, Jackson Smith-Njigba, but he did things last year. So I think a lot of people are already aware of who he is. So just by definition of what you're asking, I think it has to be somebody who we've not seen or seen very little of. And with Marvin Harrison as a true freshman, I think he's going to be the guy. Emeka Egbuka, probably a little higher ranked by the recruiting services coming out. I think he could still have a tremendous year. But Marvin Harrison Jr. There's just something about him. Each year we see the guy who comes out, that first year guy. It's like that's going to be the guy, and we've been pretty accurate in predicting those. And I feel confident saying that it'll be Marvin.
All right, we'll definitely hold you to that, and I will use that to my advantage. Thayer Munford, how does he compare to some of the best offensive tackles that Ohio State has produced?
Well, I mean, he's won All-American status. I mean, all Big Ten, everything else. And what does Ohio State do to reward him? Moves him to guard. So I mean, he's playing left guard, but that's going to give him even more flexibility at the next level, because he's going to be able to play tackle. He's going to be able to play guard. I mean, there are going to be 4 positions on the line. I don't see him ever snapping the ball, but 4 positions that he'll be able to play. He's dealt with some back issues through his career. I think that in terms of that maybe the playing at guard might, help his durability a little bit of what he's going to be able to do. But, Ohio State also really wanted to get, 6'9", 3.5 Bills, DeJuan Jones out there at right tackle. So you sit there and you have tackles of DeJuan Jones at right and Nick Petit-Frere at left. You still have to get Thayer Munford out there. So, Munford is just, this is what the team thinks about him. They honored him with the last year, teams were allowed to give somebody the number 0 jersey. Well, Thayer Munford can't wear it because of being on the line. He just can't wear a 0. So he's wearing a patch. So, and what Ohio State calls it is the Block O. Instead of the 0 jersey, it's the Block O jersey, which, is associated with Bill Willis, who's in all the Hall of Fames throughout football and whatnot. So there certainly is a lot of love for Munford as not only as a player, but as a teammate, as a young man, and everything else. I think that Thayer's got just a great trajectory with what's left of his career.
To me, that's the biggest difference between Ohio State and, if we're just talking to Big Ten and their biggest rivals, Michigan. It's right there. It's in the trenches. It's the offensive line. I said Ohio State can move a Munford inside the guard, and here comes another 5-star offensive tackle that's 6'9", 3 whatever. That's the dominating factor for Ohio, because once you do that, it just frees up your entire offense. Your quarterback basically can sit there most of the time. He doesn't get touched very often unless you play the really good defensive teams, and that's where all the explosive plays come. And I just think until Michigan starts recruiting better and along the offensive line, I don't know when that gap is going to shrink. So that's just, to me, the biggest deal of why Ohio State is so dominant.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be the lines, and I don't know if it's, if it's something, this year or this decade. I think it's just always going to be there. And you look at Michigan, and that's not to take away things from an Aiden Hutchinson or somebody like that, but it's just it's about recruiting.
Yeah.
And Michigan certainly is, there've been some talented guys that have come through. I'm not going to sit there and, oh, you cover Ohio State, so therefore you must hate Michigan. No, but I went to Ohio State, so I certainly had 5 years of indoctrination when I was an undergrad at Ohio State about all of that. But I think if you sit there and you look at the rosters, Ohio State and Michigan aren't even necessarily recruiting the same kids. Ohio State's out there recruiting offensive and defensive linemen against the Alabamas, the UGAs,
Yes.
and so on and so forth. Michigan, not as much, and I'm not going to say that's to a man or anything like that, but you can certainly see it there. So that's always been one of the biggest things in terms of recruiting that's jumped off the board, is that Michigan does not recruit the same kids as Ohio State. And that doesn't always mean that Ohio State has identified the right guys. I mean, Ohio State, certainly has misses as well, but
you can afford
Ohio
misses
State,
when you have so many hits.
right. And, you sit there and I mean, I can name guys that Ohio State's missed that have ended up at Alabama. I can go in the other, in the other direction. Yes, Michigan does recruit against LSU and some schools like that. They certainly have some different recruiting territories than what Ohio State does. But I think until Michigan really, and that's not to say Michigan needs to pick up Ohio State's recruiting board and say, well, we're going to go after all these guys because our evaluation's terrible and Ohio State's evaluation's fantastic.
Yeah.
So we need to do that. Well, if you're not evaluating well, you're probably not developing well either.
Sure.
So, but I think that until we see a little bit more of an overlap, Michigan during the 90s, when I was an undergrad at Ohio State, was coming into Ohio and just taking kids from Ohio State left and right. And that's when this whole series was skewed in the other direction. So, I just think that there's a lot of things that need to be evaluated there. If you're a fan of the maize and blue.
Well, again, that's the thing I have not seen at Michigan in a while is really good blue chip offensive linemen, and maybe one here, one there, but compared to Ohio State, it's just like night and day. Okay, on the defensive side, and we talked about some of the other names already, especially up front: Zach Harrison, Garrett. There's also Tyreek Smith. Cody Simon, by the way, had the other sack. But again, this is where the defense is going to shine most of all. Zach Harrison and Haskell Garrett. How do they compare to some of the the really top defensive linemen that have come out of Ohio State? And then also give me maybe a breakout player, just like I asked you on offense, maybe for the defensive line, somebody that we don't know who they are just yet.
Well, I think that the bar is so high on the defensive end that it's just something that somebody like, Zach Harrison's probably going to struggle living up to, because we're talking about top 5 picks across the board with both of the Bosas and Chase Young.
True,
so, making comparisons there is, it's just
not fair.
It's not fair to them. Just like, younger than him, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau, who both come in as top 10 type of 5-star talents, they're going to have to live by those types of standards. So, I mean, it's very difficult on that. But, I think that you can still sit there and look at Zach Harrison and see somebody that it took a couple of years for everything to start to come together. The physical talents have always been there. I mean, I think that, with Zach, I mean, Zach is such a cerebral guy. I think maybe he's just kind of overthought things, and maybe this is the first year that he's just kind of letting it go. I'll go to like Star Wars, and I'm a big nerd like that, and Luke turns off the targeting computer and uses the Force. Yes. Zach Harrison needs to use the Force.
Okay.
If Zach Harrison uses the Force and allows the Force to guide him, I think he can be pretty good, as we saw during that strip sack. Haskell Garrett, I think that we can sit there and go through some guys that played in the league forever and a day in terms of, interior line. And while Haskell's more of a 3 and like Jonathan Hankins was more of a nose, I mean, I think that you see some similarities in terms of just their tenacious type of play. I stay on the interior line, Devon Hamilton, who's been getting it done in the league. You can sit there. A lot of Ohio State's defensive tackles go underrated, maybe a little unheralded, but that's because of the guys that are lining up outside of them. And because of that, you don't see
Sure.
what these guys are able to do. So
Until you read their draft profiles, and then all of a sudden they're all scattered across the NFL.
right, exactly. And then, you kind of talk about a guy that could maybe step up. We really thought that Jack Sawyer might be the guy as a true freshman. He enrolled for spring for winter quarter or winter semester. I keep forgetting they've gone to semesters. Winter semester, went through spring practice. But the other five-star defensive end, JT Tuimoloau, who came in over the summer, saw significantly more playing time against Minnesota.
Okay.
So whether or not that was just a matter of him being just, a better fit for what they were trying to do, or maybe he's just a little bit ahead, even though he's had less time, I'm going to say that JT is going to be the guy that could maybe be the one who steps in. And Ohio State certainly is going to need one of these young guys to do that, because Ohio State did lose Tyler Friday before the start of the season for what should be either most or all of the season due to a knee injury.
Okay. That's a bit. That's a little bit of a blow there. Then okay. Then in the back seven, with all the key losses, the first thing I have to ask you is, who's next? Who's at linebacker and in the secondary? Give me a name in each unit by the end of the year that you'll say, oh, see, this is the next, maybe really good Ohio State linebacker or the next great defensive back at Ohio State. Is that player on the roster yet?
Yeah, I think the players are on the roster, and I think we certainly saw one in terms of we'll start in the secondary. When you look at Denzel Burke, saw a lot of snaps. He had to step in because Ohio State was down two top corners in that game. No Seven Banks, no Cameron Brown. So they were forced to really dig deep and be able to kind of figure some things out. And I'm not taking anything away from some of their other young talent. I mean, they certainly have some young guys who have not been able to get in yet in terms of Ja'Kalen Johnson. So those are guys that could really step into some roles. But Denzel Burke got out there. He had, I believe, 3 PBUs in the game.
Yep.
They certainly tested a young guy in terms of that. But, we'll see what the rotation looks like. We're hearing positive things about Banks and Brown both being back this week. We'll have an opportunity to talk with Ryan Day throughout the week. He's really guarded with injury news. So, we're not expecting anything definitive to come out, but we'll kind of see. And then when we look at linebacker, I mean, obviously Taraji Mitchell's kind of, he's captain. He's the guy that we're kind of expecting to lock down the position. We saw bits and pieces of Cody Simon. He wasn't necessarily operating at 100% in the game. I really like Craig Young. I think that when we get to see Craig Young out there, it's going to be really hard to keep him off of the field. I mean, he's just a freakish type of talent. He can do a little bit of everything in terms of playing on the outside. He's the name that, here as we talk about this the first week of September, you'll think about it in a month and you'll look at the stat line. You'll be like, oh, that noon guy knew what he was talking about. Craig Young's pretty good. I think that once he gets out there, he's going to make a lot of believers.
Okay, so Craig Young at linebacker and Denzel Burke in the secondary. Those are the guys that are leading the charge as far as you're concerned as of today.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, so Oregon. And again, I don't know what to make of this game because, UCLA had a huge upset, which was great for the Pac-12. Look, I'm a college football fan, so I think it was great for college football. I think it's really good when Chip Kelly can win at UCLA. I think it just, especially the Pac-12 needs to get better. I think it's really good if the Pac-12 would start to get more competitive and we can get them to be able to face up and play the Ohio States of the world and so forth. And that's what we'll see this week with Oregon, because Oregon has been one of those top teams for the last couple of years. But Anthony Brown is now taking over a quarterback. And yes, he had the 30-yard touchdown run, the game-winning touchdown run with 3 minutes to go. But that's really what Anthony Brown does. He's not that much of a passer. He doesn't turn the ball over. So that's, I think, why he's the quarterback there. I think they have a talented young quarterback sitting on the bench, but Brown's a guy that they feel they can just win with. And now here's his chance against Ohio State. But this is the mystery: was Oregon looking ahead? Or is this maybe an Oregon team that we overrated in the beginning of the season? We'll find out on Saturday.
Yeah, and I really was trying to find the game, but 12 people and a small dog get Pac-12 network. I'm not
It's terrible.
one of those 12 people that get it. So, I was forced to watch, some highlights and cut-ups that I was able to get my hands on. But yeah, we don't know what Anthony Brown's going to be able to do there. And, we talk about sometimes, well, they're holding stuff back. Well, maybe they were holding the whole throwing the ball thing. And
I doubt
and
it.
the, and the and the truth of the matter is that, when you get into these big games, you're always going to get your opponent's best shot. So Ohio State's going to get Oregon's best shot and vice versa. I certainly expect to see them try to do some things because I think that trying to attack Ohio State's secondary is probably the way to do things. Now, mobile quarterbacks are always horrible to cover. I mean, it is what it is. It is what it is. Ohio State pretty good against the run under normal circumstances. You still have Minnesota going for 203 in the game. But you were going against a special back with Mo Abraham. I'm wishing him the best after he sustained the injury that he did in the game. That's going to be a big hit for the Gophers. But I think Ohio State's going to really try to clamp down and try to force Oregon to beat them via the pass. And I think that plays pretty well into Ohio State's hands. But with that being said, it's there's a reason why we've seen so many teams move to that dual threat type of quarterback,
Sure.
or even maybe even more so than that, the run first type of quarterback. And Anthony Brown seems to be that type of guy. It's certainly going to it's certainly going to be a test for Ohio State to be able to account for that, because mobile quarterbacks have not normally completely slayed Ohio State, but they do pick up some yardage. So we'll see.
And also with Travis Dye and CJ Verdell, that's where Oregon wants to be able to win the football game. They're almost like, hey, look what Minnesota did. Can we do what Minnesota did, but not give up the big plays as much? Because Oregon, what I was surprised about was the defense. Because Oregon's got some really good defensive players. Thibodeau is obviously at the top. But you're talking about, Noah Sewell was a terrific freshman last year. Penny's little brother, Mikael Wright at corner. They've got some good guys up in the secondary. This is a really talented defensive team. Cristobal has done a tremendous job recruiting there. That's why I was wondering, maybe the defense was just a little vanilla against Fresno. They're holding back. They don't want Ohio State to see everything. But I don't know if that was the case, because they waited. If that was, you can't lose, like you said before, you can't lose the game. And they almost lost the game to Fresno State. And again, they gave up 380 yards of total offense, I believe, and only had 358. So they got outgained by 15 yards. But they did force 3 turnovers, and that was the key. So that's, I think, the matchup in this game. Is Oregon's defense for real? Does Thibodeau play? And if he does, how does that match up with the Ohio State offense and that huge offensive line?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, do you empty the bucket to try and win this game? I think the Pac-12 is very winnable. I think the Pac-12 is very winnable this year. So do you sit there and put a 65% Thibodeau out there and run the risk of him hurting himself and losing him for the year to just try and win this non-conference game? I mean, obviously, winning this game for Oregon would add legitimacy if Oregon would be able to go on and win the Pac-12 and maybe finally get the Pac-12 to break through for the first time in a while in terms of college football playoff. But the risk on this side is that he gets hurt and you lose him for the year. And that's not to say that Oregon suddenly becomes a second-tier type of team losing Kayvon Thibodeau, but I think that you're no longer a top 10, top 15 type of team nationally without Thibodeau, because he's just that special. So, it's ultimately going to come down, I think, to Thibodeau and how he responds to treatment this week and everything else, and trying it out and seeing what's going on there. As a fan of college football, I certainly would love to see him out there. I'd love to see what that would look like and everything else. As somebody who works for a site that covers Ohio State, I guarantee you that most of the fans out there are like, sit him. Let's see him in some sweet Oregon Nike gear, just sitting on the sidelines or whatnot. But it'll be interesting. But it's not to say that Oregon doesn't have some dudes with Sewell and some of these other guys. I think their secondary has some dudes, and it's going to be a good challenge. I think it's going to be a case of if Thibodeau's not there, though. With Ohio State's tremendous offensive line, if Stroud playing at home under different circumstances than playing at Huntington Bank Stadium and having, a very vocal crowd against him. I think this could really be a big coming out party for Stroud, and he could have some big numbers because Ohio State doesn't necessarily need to do a lot of downfield throwing. I mean, they can do, as we saw, as I said earlier, we saw a lot of 6 and 7 yard passes that went for 16, 17, yep. 40 yards because of the talent of Ohio State's guys after the catch.
Well, look, I'm that fan. I want to see Thibodeau play. I'm sure the scouts. There's probably be more scouts at this game than just about any game outside of the playoffs, and that's how many scouts are going to be at this game with Oregon and Thibodeau and all the other players for Oregon and Ohio State, and just seeing Thibodeau on the offensive line go up against some of those top players, including Munford. A few snaps here and there would be great to see. But we'll see. As a fan, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that we see it. And I think it'll be better for the game, of course. But we'll see. As far as Ohio State, the next time we talk, Kevin, just taking a look at the schedule, it's really not all that bad after Oregon. Matter of fact, chances are Ohio State cruises through the bye. And then you got a couple of back-to-back tough matchups, which is maybe the next time we'll talk, somewhere around that Indiana road game and that Penn State home game. So not sure what to make of Indiana week 1. I think that's a throwaway. But Penn State defensively looks awfully good.
Yeah, I was going to say that Penn State-Wisconsin game. I ended up drawing some ire on social media, but I did get a lot of likes and follows out of it. I said, it's really interesting how narratives are already shaped up before the game. Penn State and Wisconsin play a scoreless first half, and people are like, why is football forsaking us? This is horrible. And then you sit there and you look at Clemson UGA, and there's no offensive points. Yeah. There was the defensive pick six. They play, no offensive points in the first half of their game, and this is just two high-level teams doing what they do or whatever. And look, Clemson and maybe not Clemson this year. I don't know what to make of that Clemson offense.
That was ugly.
2 rushing yards, and I think DJ is going to take a minute to get there. They certainly are missing Trevor Lawrence, but I think UGA handles Penn State and Wisconsin on a neutral field, especially south of the Mason-Dixon line. But it was very interesting to see how people were saying that these were, apples and Volkswagens in terms of different product. And while I agree again that, in terms of star rankings and some things there, and maybe, there were some instances in the UGA game to where it was defensive stops, and maybe in the Penn State game, it was just missed opportunities, but it just once again went to illustrate the fact that even before it started, Big Ten football, quote unquote, bad, ugly, and everybody else good and fantastic.
And if you're a college, if you really come on, and if you had to pick which one of those 2 games you would have preferred to be at, please, how could you not want to be at Camp Randall? The way that place was just going off, especially it was awesome. That third to fourth quarter timeout that they had, where the place was just going electric. It's just great to see the fans back. And it was an electric atmosphere. Yes, Wisconsin bumbled the ball a few times, and there were missed 5-yard field goals for both sides, and it was a little ugly. But I still think, in general, like you said, look, maybe Georgia because they have a little bit more at quarterback, maybe, but I thought the kid DJ was actually pretty good last year when he played. I don't know what happened to him. It was like, I've never seen this kid before. Who is he? So I don't know what to make of that game, but I actually enjoyed the Penn State Wisconsin game more. Watching the Clemson Georgia game, I just thought it was hard to watch. It's in a dome. Both fan bases were there. I just didn't get anything out of it myself.
I was going to say the Big Ten game had much more of a regular season feel to it because it was on campus and everything else. And you're right. The other one was at a dome. It felt much more like, and people are going to say, well, yeah, you're about to say a conference championship game or something along those lines, or a playoff game or a bowl game. So therefore it's got to be better. Well, not always, because of the fact of, it was a little bit more, I don't know, muted in terms of, it wasn't on a campus. You didn't have the same type of pomp and circumstance that you would in terms of a game that happens on campus. I thoroughly enjoyed watching both of them. I did find myself wandering to my iPad a little bit more during the Clemson UGA game. But again, it's a case of, I'm paid to watch the Big Ten, so I better pay attention there. Sure. So I can come on shows like this and be able to talk about it without sounding like a total idiot.
Well, look, you're not a total an idiot. We know that for sure. And we look forward to having you back again during Indiana and Penn State, because after that, even things get a little easier until the Michigan State-Michigan matchups, maybe. Kevin, great job as always. I appreciate it. It's always great talking Ohio State football with you, Big Ten football. And again, we'll talk in the next couple of months. And between now and then, we'll check you out at Buckeye Scoop. And we'll also look out for whenever the podcasts start churning out. And maybe we'll see you on YouTube somewhere else sometime soon, too.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Kevin.